continued fallout from the Colorado terrorist attack, Joe Biden is threatening to fight reporters, and new calls for violence against Elon Musk. All of that and so much more today on 10-Minute Drill.
Everybody get up, get up.
The story of America is the story of an adventure.
I can hear you. The rest of the world hears you.
We are a nation under God, and I believe God intended for us to be free.
On Sunday, there was a violent terrorist attack when an Egyptian national used a homemade flamethrower and other incendiary devices to light demonstrators on fire who were demonstrating for the release of hostages that are still held by Hamas in Gaza.
Then police say 45-year-old Mohammed Sabri Soliman from El Paso set people on fire with that makeshift flamethrower.
Bill Melugin from Fox News had details about this person's immigration status that were particularly notable.
Our Bill Melugin, Soliman entered the U.S. in August 2022 with a non-immigrant visa. He was authorized to stay until February 2023, but he never left.
Two key components of this attack to consider. First, the continued fallout of the anti-Israel, anti-Semitic energy that's been allowed to fester both in cities around the country, but also particularly on college campuses, where we've seen colleges that have taken large amounts of money from foreign governments like Qatar, who both funded the October 7th attack, but also have funded so many of America's enemies, have tried to continue to seed anti-Semitic, anti-Israel energy in the wake of October 7th, with phrases like global intifada and from the river to the seas, which they treat just as simple speech, but are actually threats against Jewish people. It's been treated again just as words, but now we've seen multiple instances of violence, first in a shooting in D.C. of 2 Israeli embassy employees, and now in this horrifying attack in Colorado. The second component of this that's really important is the focus on Joe Biden's immigration policies. Things like old asylum claims, things like work authorizations that had expired with very little oversight. President Biden, particularly in his last 2 years in office, signed a lot of immigration policies into action, again, with very little oversight. A lot of those policies felt like they were intended to make it more difficult to ever remove anyone from this country under any reason. And now that we've got multiple instances of violent terrorism coming out of people who had overstayed visas, there's going to continue to be more questions from Congress about these policies. Last week, the Supreme Court sided with President Trump, allowing him to resume deportations of 530,000 non-citizens who entered under Biden's humanitarian parole program. That decision clears the way to roll back a key, very controversial Biden-era policy that allowed migrants from Cuba, Haiti, Nicaragua, and Venezuela to stay in the United States for an extended period of time. As we talk about Joe Biden and some of the really damaging policies he left in place, CNN, now I feel like we're doing this, every few weeks now, CNN has new polling that shows that Democrats haven't quite found the bottom in their polling and brand identity struggles.
Plus 8-point advantage for the Republican Party. How is that possible, Democrats? How is that possible after all the recession fears, after the stock market's been doing all of this, after all the tariffs that Americans are against, and Republicans still hold an 8-point lead on the economy? Are you kidding me?
So again, it's important to note CNN is not the only pollster that continues to find Republicans have a major advantage on who the American people trust more to handle the economy. Now again, as you saw with Harry, it's surprising to people because they believe after all the market fluctuation from the beginning of President Trump's trade announcement, they believe people should have less confidence in Republicans, but polls show that's not the case. One of the continued reasons for that lack of trust in Democrats and Democrat leadership is Joe Biden, who made a rare public appearance last week and said this.
And there's also been a lot of discussion recently about your mental and physical capabilities while you were in office.
You can see that. I'm mentally incompetent and I can't walk and I can beat the hell out of both of them.
Now, challenging people to fights is not new for Joe Biden. He did it throughout his administration, sometimes jokingly. This one, it feels a little bit serious. But as we continue to talk about Joe Biden, there is new continued scrutiny of the use of auto pens to sign major policies into place. Here's Jim Comer over the weekend.
Many of the far-reaching executive orders were signed during the last 100 days, and they were all signed by the auto pen. We don't believe that you can sign a legal document with an Autopen.
A watchdog group called Power the Future is raising new questions about just how many and what kind of specific policies were signed into Autopen with or without the authorization of Joe Biden himself. Now, you'll remember one of the main reasons that this got so much attention was a story that Speaker Johnson told. Speaker Johnson, in a meeting with President Biden, said specifically, "Why did you pause liquid natural gas exports to Europe?" That empowered Russia in so many ways, because when Joe Biden paused LNG exports to Europe, Europe was forced to rely on Putin and fund Putin at the same time as he was making major strides in his war against Ukraine. President Biden said he had no recollection of doing that. And that was a major red flag to Speaker Johnson and others. But as we continue through the administration, in the last few months, they were major pardons that broke with all sorts of norms and precedents, particularly, for example, the pardon of Hunter Biden, which came at the same time as White House staff were telling the media that Hunter Biden had taken on a role of a de facto chief of staff. So now it's fair to ask questions. Did Hunter Biden play a role in writing and having signed his own presidential pardon? There will be more questions, as you saw House Oversight Committee and Jim Comer are going to look into this, but this issue isn't going away anytime soon, no matter how many people Joe Biden tries to fight. If you like what you're hearing on 10 Minute Drill about Joe Biden trying to fight people and every other funny story under the sun, subscribe on Apple Podcasts. On Friday, Elon Musk held his farewell press conference with President Trump, and one of the most interesting questions he got was this.
What do you think would be easier, colonizing Mars or making the government efficient?
It's a tough call, but I think colonizing Mars and making life multi-planetary is harder.
Note the pause there, the difficulty he has answering about whether or not it'd be easier to build a colony on Mars or make our government work more efficiently. As Elon departs into the sunset, now again, he said he'll still remain involved as an advisor, but as Elon rides off into the sunset in his official capacity, it's important to consider all the forces that were working against him as he tried to make government more efficient and get rid of fraud, waste, and abuse, something that, again, is overwhelmingly popular. Some of the key figures working against him, elected officials. You had Democrats shuffling from federal building to federal building, decrying the effort to find any fraud, waste, or abuse in government because elected Democrats know just how important bureaucracy and waste is to funding their political operations. 2, government unions. Now, we have talked here extensively about government unions and how outrageous it is that that even exists. The fact that government unions exist for government workers to negotiate against taxpayers is absurd and outrageous. We've also talked about dark money groups funded by Arabella Advisors, George Soros, who have mobilized these protests around the country. But the fourth, and perhaps most important in understanding the violent vitriol towards Elon Musk, I believe, comes from the media.
This is an effort to destroy the government so that it's easier for oligarchs and the Heritage Foundation to do whatever they wish.
The world's richest man killing the world's poorest children.
We want to continue to investigate that. And certainly, I think some crimes may have been committed over the past 3 or 4 months.
The fact that your country is under assault. They're not at the gate anymore. They're in your bedrooms. They're in your living rooms. They're in your businesses. They got your data, dumbass. They got all your stuff. Elon Musk has his tentacles in everything you're doing.
The media jumped on every piece of viral misinformation, and one of the latest that I think is particularly egregious is a point that 300,000 people have already died due to Doge cutting USAID. First, here's Bono on that.
It's not proven, but the surveillance enough suggests 300,000 people have already died.
And then on Sunday on PBS, which again is supposed to be a nonpartisan network, here's David Brooks.
According to the Boston University folks, so far 55,000 adults have died of AIDS in the 4 months since Trump was elected. 6,000 children are dead because of what a Doge did. That's just PEPFAR, the HIV. You add them all up, that's 300,000 dead, and we're 4 months in. Now you accumulate that over 4 years, the number of dead grows very high. There are mass murderers in the world, Pol Pot, Mao Zedong, Stalin. We don't have anybody on the list for America.
So as you hear that 300,000 number from David Brooks, it's so important to first understand that's not accurate at all. The study that David Brooks is citing is not people who have died. There has not been a single documented death from the cutting of funding to USAID. he is citing projections of what could happen if about 45 other things go wrong in the places that were receiving aid from USAID. For example, this assumes that all aid stopped when a number of programs were continued under the State Department or through waivers that President Trump granted to a number of organizations that provide life-saving care. This projection also assumes that if an organization takes a part of their funding from USAID, that it would still shut down if it lost that part. For example, if one organization took $100 million from USAID and $500 million from the UN and other places, if they lost that 100, they would shut down completely and everyone relying on it would die, which is, again, an absurd projection. But this goes to the fact that David Brooks is citing this 300,000 figure incorrectly so that he can compare Elon Musk to Pol Pot, who is responsible for the deaths of anywhere from 10 to 55 million people, or Stalin, who's responsible for estimates of 6 to 9 million people. This goes back to the point that if you normalize calling someone like Elon Musk Hitler or Stalin or Pol Pot, and you try and convince them that they are responsible for human deaths, like David Brooks just did, do not be surprised when they turn to violence and domestic terrorism like we've seen with, firebombing at Tesla dealerships, liberal activists running Tesla drivers off the road simply for owning a Tesla. It is egregious, and if lying about Elon Musk being responsible for 300,000 deaths isn't fodder for a lawsuit, I don't know what is. I hope members of the media will be a little bit more responsible about viral misinformation like this, particularly when it comes to simple efforts to cut fraud, waste, and abuse from the government, because our government desperately needs it. For today's You Can't Make It Up segment, we had too many good sound bites to choose from, so we're going to start first with our friend, Tim Waltz.
But when it's a dope like Donald Trump, you bully the shit out of him back. You push back.
Here's a live look at what we think it will look like if Tim Waltz tried to bully somebody.
Jeez.
It also could look like this.
And just maybe... Yeah, there it is! Slapped you! You probably think I'm finished, huh?
Tim Waltz is our favorite here because he's like the party guest that will never leave. The party's ended, it's been 2 hours, everyone else went home. Tim's still sitting on the couch, flipping channels on the remote, wanting to have a conversation. Tim, take a hint. You guys lost in November with you leading the charge. You drove the party into a ditch. You're probably not the guy to get him out of it. But on that same note, our next soundbite comes from Jasmine Crockett.
I've had a number of Republicans that approach me as they see me out and they say, hey, I just wanted to let you know that I really like you.
Jasmine, Republicans like you because they hope you'll keep talking, because you make it easier to create ads to run against Democrats. So please, again, keep it up. Give us, whatever link we need to give to your super PAC. We'd love to keep you in the fight. Lastly, new to this program, Joy Behar.
I think it's a waste of money. Maybe these guys should spend their money on teaching men to not be such sexists. Maybe that's it.
You'll remember last week we talked about the $20 million program Democrats are considering to learn and research how to talk to men. It sounded a lot like aliens trying to study a population to take them over. But personally, I hope they listen to Joy, because calling men racist and sexist will really continue to help us lead the way. That is all the time we have for today. Thank you so much for joining us here on 10 Minute Drill. Please like, subscribe, leave us a review, tell your friends. Have a great day.